Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. We have another fascinating show on the eve of the great rally in front of the United Nations General Assembly Special Sessions on Drugs. We're going to be talking with a representative who was supposed to speak, but who mysteriously, or maybe not so mysteriously, was bumped from the speaking list. And he's going to describe what happened in that situation. His name is Ricky Gunawan, and he is here with us in the studio. Thank you, Ricky. Nice to have you here. Great to have you on. And so let's begin by what brought you halfway around the world to New York City?
So I was invited by the UN to speak at the UN General Assembly Special Sessions. As you may know, there will be plenary sessions and roundtable sessions, and there will be 5 roundtable sessions. We started the UNGAS just today, and there was already the first roundtable on.
And we hear UNGAS a lot. That means United Nations General Assembly
Special Sessions on the world drug problem. And we had the first roundtable today about demand reductions. And I was supposed to be speaking on the 3rd roundtable on drugs and human rights and gender and youth. I got the invitation at the end of March, 28th of March. So it's formal invitations, and then I apply for my visa using that invitations. But then last week, when we checked the website, the list of the names, the speakers that they submitted to the President General Assembly did not include my name on the list. Rumor has it that perhaps my government heard about my role would be speaking, and then because of my work around the death penalty and executions, and Indonesia was heavily criticized last year about the executions. So they put the names of the government representative on the same roundtable with me. And because of there is some kind of rules that there cannot be 2 speakers from one country, of course the civil society had to bump off from the panel. So that's the situation.
Right. So basically you came all the way around the world to find out that you couldn't be on the event you were invited to, and even had a visa to speak at.
That's
well. Let's get some of the background on that. What we were just discussing off camera how there are some changes in the United States. We've had a liberalization of drug laws in many states. There's I think 24 states right now that have medical marijuana, half a dozen that have legalized it. Many more are going to join that rank. Still, parts of the country are pretty conservative, and I wouldn't advise using drugs in any of them. Given that situation, how does that compare to the situation in Indonesia?
Indonesia is very much conservative in terms of drugs. I think since the 60s, 70s, drugs was already declared as an enemy of the society that we have to get rid of, apart from like gambling and other moral crimes. And then throughout in the past 40 years, the society have been quote-unquote brainwashed by the government that drugs are evil, say no to drugs, drug users are bad people, stay away from them, they're junkie, they're addicts, there's this terminology about to describe drug user as trash of the society, garbage of the society. So that's pretty much the situation of drugs in Indonesia, very much conservative.
Not just a drug dealer or trafficker, but the drug user. And that's even by American standards, which could be very conservative, especially in that period, the 60s and 70s. That's even a whole order of magnitude greater than here.
So the campaign is pretty much about say no to drugs, and every media follow that tagline as well, follow that campaign. It's very much difficult to have an alternative discussions about drugs. It's very much difficult to have an honest and open debate about drugs, because we need to have a proper debate about drugs.
What do they mean by drugs? Which drugs are they talking about?
All kind of like narcotics, like heroin, cannabis.
The same ones we say in the United States, basically.
Yes,
mostly heroin, though. You say heroin's at the top of the list. How about marijuana?
Same class with heroin, the first class.
First class, like in the United States, actually, in federal law here. And do you have a problem, as we do with like cocaine and methadone and speed, and some of these other pills and things like that? Now, what is their attitude in Indonesia? I'm interested because there's a lot of a split personality about that here with misuse of legal prescription drugs.
Well, still cannabis and heroin pretty much used in Indonesia at the moment. Cannabis is easily obtained by the society members, and heroin is pretty much depends on the market. I mean, because of the last executions, some drug users groups said that it's very much difficult to get heroin, and the price would be very high because of the executions. But then a few months after that, it goes back to normal again.
So there's profit taking after an execution,
exactly.
basically.
Yeah.
Right. So that's interesting. So let's talk about the executions, because what are the conditions? I mean, there's been how many executions recently in Indonesia, and what was the criticisms of Indonesian society as far as the government, as far as treating addicts with this?
Last year, 14 people were executed.
How many?
14.
14.
Yeah. In just 4 periods of month. In January, 8 people, and then in April, 6 people. All for drug offenders, and 12 were foreigners, and only 2 Indonesians. So the President, Joko Widodo, was inaugurated in October. So rightly after he was inaugurated, in November, he already declared drug emergency situation. So he already said that let's kill all the death row prisoners, especially drug offenders, because if they're already on death row, let's execute them all. I will reject all the clemency applications submitted by them. So before he checked the clemency petitions, he already said that I will reject it. So that's the tendency, that so much hatred against drugs, drug offenders, drug traffickers.
Right. What drives that hatred?
I think because, again, goes back to, like, in the past decades, we've been so much brainwashed to hate drugs. Drugs are evil. That's the ideology that driven this whole situations about the executions.
What's it like for a heroin? Because once a person gets addicted to heroin, I mean, the death penalty, what does that mean? I mean, it's like, I mean, and you work with addicts and know the situation of addicts. I mean, first of all, there's many questions it raises. Number one, under those circumstances where you face the death penalty, how do you go for treatment? And is there any treatment at all? Or could there ever be any treatment under that circumstance? And number two, you know, since an addict cannot stop using heroin for any reason, you know, because they're addicted to it, how do they respond to that fear in that situation?
Well, first of all, the Indonesian drug law does not differentiate between drug users and drug traffickers.
There's no differential.
There's no differential. The only differentiation is based on the actions. So, of course, drug users will have to buy or will have to possess. And drug use will be punishable maximum of certain years of imprisonment. And drug trafficking will, for a certain higher threshold, will be punishable by the death penalty. But it's not automatically death penalty.
Okay.
So if a drug user buys a higher amount of heroin, for example, and then get caught, he may be punishable to the death penalty. But usually that's rarely happens. So if a drug users get caught, the tendency is still to imprison drug user. Even police, we always negotiate with them that this person needs treatment rather than imprisonment. But the police always said, reads the law. It says drug use is punishable by the imprisonment. There is no clear that we
How
must.
long is the imprisonment for, let's say, a typical user like you would find in the United States with a couple of packets of heroin and some works and things, you know, paraphernalia? What would they face?
Maximum 4 years of imprisonment.
4 years maximum. Okay. What is it? So, in what way? I mean, the death penalty seems harsh. However, some would say, oh, traffickers are bringing the drugs in. They're committing a horrendous crime. They're making other people. They're turning other people into addicts, so they should be punished. I mean,
I mean, because the situation now is that even after 2 rounds of executions, big raids still happen. Like the National Narcotics Board of the Indonesia, they still raids almost every day, almost every week, there's always the news that they managed to get this big dealer 100 kilos or 100 grams, 50 grams of heroin. There's always this case
What's
every
the
week.
threshold for getting the death penalty? How much?
Minimum 5 grams of heroin.
5 grams of heroin can get you the death penalty?
That's
not 5 tons.
No, that's already that you can be punishable by the death penalty, but not mandatory.
Okay,
but not
now,
automatically.
now you're clarifying it for me. 5 grams is considered, right? 5 grams is a lot of heroin, but at the same time, you know, I mean, my experience in the United States, not Indonesia, you know, there's probably more than a few apartments in New York City that have 5 grams of heroin sitting in a bag somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, usually, if it's only 10 grams, maybe only like 20 years imprisonment, 25.
25 years.
But
that's
if
a long
it's
time.
Yeah, but if it's 100 grams or 120, 200 grams, that will be almost certainly gets the death penalty.
Wow, that's not the French Connection. If you ever seen that movie, where it was a whole carload of hundreds of pounds of it, I guess they just shoot them right there, right? Possibly, anyway. So that very interesting. So now you mentioned earlier that it's mostly foreigners, not Indonesians. And what countries do those people usually come from? And my next question would be from the United States.
In the first decade, like from the 90s until the early 2000s, it was majority African people, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Kenyan.
Mules, drug mules.
Drug mules. Yeah. So there was this tendency of racism as well. So after we passed that kind of decades, we still have that stigma or prejudice within the society and then law enforcement agencies as well. So for example, if we see a black African people in shopping malls, we have that kind of negative perception. So maybe he's dealing drugs and so on.
Okay.
But after around late 2000s, it's now shifting towards white people, European, Australian.
They actually execute Europeans.
Yeah, last year there was there were 2 Australians executed. 2 Brazilians, and then others are from Africans.
So they don't. I imagine. I mean, I think I heard about the Australian cases. I mean, there was tremendous protests in Australia.
Yeah.
And the Australians were fit to be tied over it.
Yeah, because both of them had shown remarkable transformative process within the prisons. And again, if we go back to the concept of rehabilitation in prison, is that just you make them to become a good person again?
Sure.
So they actually led a Christian group in prison. So they led the churches, they led the prayers, they even taught paintings, English teaching to other Indonesian prisoners. So that's good.
Right.
But at the end, they will get executed as well.
Anyway, that's just to pass the time before the inevitable happens. And they did not listen to the Australian government.
No.
Would they listen to the United States government?
That's a difficult question. Politically, the Indonesian government now moving towards the China. So maybe American, not really, but I mean, if it's with political bargain, maybe they will
It would be a political bargain. Bargaining justice in people's lives.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
And there's one American on death row as well.
There is one American on death row.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about this person?
No, not in detail.
It'd be interesting to find out. I'm concerned with everybody, not just the American, but the American might be from New York or something. I might know him, might know his family or something. Who knows? Very interesting. Now, you said that there was some. So tell me, I want to ask more about all the law and the process and all that, but I want to know more about you, Ricky. How did you get involved in this in the first place? Are you an attorney?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about how you got involved in this kind of work.
So goes back to 2008. So when we established these legal aid organizations, we had a rally on June 26, which is Anti-Drugs Day and Anti-Torture Day.
Did they say just say no?
Yeah.
They got that from Nancy Reagan.
Yeah.
She just died a little bit ago.
Yeah. So in June 26, as a human rights organization, we rally on the occasion of the Anti-Torture Day. So we protested and had a campaign.
As cruel and unusual punishment, right?
Yeah. And then drug users group came into the rally, and they said that we've been victims of police torture for all these times, and there's no human rights organization, human rights groups paid attention to their human rights cases. So then we started to have a communication with them. We built a relationship with them and started off from there. We started to do legal empowerment. So we provide legal and human rights training for drug users communities in Jakarta first off, and then surrounding areas, and then across the country. So from there we got into the issue of drug policy, drug law, treatment, and we eventually know that there are a lot of human rights issues around drug policy.
I see. And so now, but considering the hostility, how do you deal with that? Do you find hostility in your day-to-day work?
Not to extreme degree, but sometimes there have been talks. For example, one time we had a case against the National Narcotics Board on the freedom of information. So they have these internal regulations on controlled delivery and undercover buy. So we want to know what are the details of these mechanisms, because we've heard so many times that drug users cases were fabricated. So police undercover and then and then arrested the drug users. So we want to know the details of the regulations, and then we file freedom of information to them and asking for the disclosure, but then they reject it.
Sort of, you're talking about entrapment type of things, where they maybe they can actually go to you with drugs and try and involve you in a drug trade, in which everybody involved is a policeman. We call it buy and bust. Is that they do buy and bust there too as well? Same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, same kind of thing.
Undercover policeman makes a buy, and then boom.
Yeah, exactly. That's the concept.
Are the US DEA there too?
Probably link, but not really.
Okay, right. It's not like in South America where they actually have an office there.
No.
But they might read the books and look. I see how they do it. Very interesting. Okay, Ricky Gunawan, thank you very much. I want to know really more about your experiences, because it seems in some ways like a dystopian view of the United States system, like what at its worst it could have been here, because in many ways it sounds very similar. So what's interesting to me is what happens as far as well, let's talk about some of the other drugs that are involved. Do you have like marijuana, for example? Is it possible to get the death penalty for marijuana?
So last year there was one Indonesian executed for possession of marijuana, 50 kilos of marijuana. But he was fabricated as well. So his friend asked him to
fabricated. What do you mean by
So his friend asked him to carry out a big bag, which he didn't know what a bag consists of, and so he just trusted his friend, and he put inside his home, and then police came in, and then boom. Arrested and prosecuted and get that sentence. Okay. And he was...
how much marijuana was involved?
50 kilos.
So 50 kilos, 100 pounds of marijuana.
Yeah. So he was...
That's worth 18 months here.
Yeah, it's a huge amount in Indonesia, and then again because of the hatred against drugs, death sentence.
It could have been the death sentence in past years.
Yeah.
Or it could have been a very serious crime in past years. It's only recently been reduced a little bit, and that's not everywhere, believe me. So okay, very interesting. I know, and also jail is a terrible experience. I mean, even a few years in jail can change a person forever and affect their lives in terrible ways. It's a very difficult situation to be in jail. Well, it's interesting because here in the United States, we were discussing this earlier, in many places we're changing the law. I mean, it's been legalized in 4 states in District of Columbia. It might be as many as a half a dozen or more states legalized eventually by the end of the year. And there's 24 states that have medical marijuana. We have at least one city, maybe San Francisco, which is thinking of actually providing safe injection places for addicts to go and to safely inject drugs. We have needle exchange, where people are getting, being able to exchange their used needles for clean ones in order to cut down on AIDS. Are there any programs like that going on in Indonesia?
Yeah, we have a methadone program as well for drug users. We have needle exchange program. But in terms of like,
is that legal?
Yeah, legal.
It is legal, yes. But how can
so you have to prescribe first to the doctors, and then doctors will give it to you.
Oh, that's interesting. You could prescribe heroin.
Methadone.
Methadone. I see.
Yeah. So you will go to the community.
Do people inject methadone? Is that?
No, they drink it.
They drink it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But why would they have needle exchange?
That's so we have two options. So you could go methadone or needle exchange program.
I see. Now, but with the needle exchange, wouldn't that entail having possession of residue of heroin in the needle and stuff like that?
So in the past few years, there's cases where if you got found out that you bring also needles, and then you get arrested.
Right.
But that's not the case.
Paraphernalia law.
Yeah. But that's because the police did not understand that it's part of the needle exchange program, that it's harm reduction package, that it reduces HIV/AIDS transmission, and so on. So there was a lot of effort to educate the police so they understand that it's not really about drug use, as in like drug use.
Right.
But it's more about the harm reduction.
I see. So is there a problem with HIV transmission by needles in Indonesia?
We managed to reduce HIV prevalence among injecting drug users now because of the successful needle exchange program.
So there is some recognition of the need for change.
Yeah.
Isn't that setting up a contradictory message?
Yeah. That's why.
You said yeah.
So there's been a lot of discussion to revise the drug law. We just have this new head of the National Narcotics Board. His background is police, and he said that we have to send drug users to prison because lots of drug traffickers claim that they are drug users, partly because the drug law does not differentiate between the two.
Okay.
Yes, in practice, there are drug traffickers that they said, I'm a drug user. So they got treatment instead of imprisonment. And so there's this proposal, let's imprison drug users because we cannot differentiate them anymore. So that's one proposal. And there are a lot of controversial proposals as well. For example, he also suggested to build the prisons surrounded with piranhas or crocodiles, because prison officials, we cannot trust them. The drug traffickers can bribe prison officers.
What is an Indonesian prison like?
Very poor, very, very bad situations, and overcrowded because of drug offenders.
And is it... in my mind, I have Mexican prisons in mind, so I don't know, but where it's almost like a separate society inside the prison based on bribery and where people can even get things if they're powerful enough and violent enough, whatever they want in the jail, and just live like a normal life and even continue doing crime. Yeah,
there have been cases where prisoners can have luxurious rooms, so they can have TVs, they can have cell phones. And
I'm thinking of El Chapo, for example, right? That kind of
things
thing,
like
right?
that.
Yes, definitely. And so the feeling is, prison isn't punitive enough because if you have resources in the prison, you could have everything you want.
Yeah.
And do relatives have to bring food and things like that in the same kind of thing? So you have access to relatives coming in and out and things like that.
But when the family comes in, and then prison officers usually ask for money because of the visits. So therefore, the family also not just bring food, but also bring money for them to get to bribes, to be able to pay for their cell phones, to pay for the better foods, and so on.
How is a depressing subject, but I think it's germane. What is the method of execution in Indonesia?
Firing squad.
Firing squad, actually considered the most humane. In the United States, we have a lot of problems with that. It says no cruel and unusual punishment, but everything they can think of is more cruel and unusual than they're shooting people. Right? Interesting. We have the death penalty here, as you know, in many states. And more people are executed here than almost anywhere outside maybe China or something. Okay, so is there any opening? I mean, we have like so many interesting things happening. We've discussed on this show with other guests, like Heather Haas was here, and she was talking about Switzerland, for example, and how you can go to a location and get your heroin given to you in order to keep you off the streets. I mean, is there any opening to that? I mean, when people say what's happening in the United States, what's happening, is that getting through at all to the officials, the possibility of change, and even in the United States things are changing?
No, that's
which is not a liberal state on drugs by any means.
That's very difficult. I mean, like with the Portugal success, with the Czech success.
Yeah, Portugal too as well, which has a big connection, right?
Yeah. So once the Indonesia government came to Portugal, and then they saw the model there, but then they said this will not work in Indonesia because different political context, different sociological context, different norms, different cultural. But they acknowledged that it's a successful program in Portugal. So we've been trying, civil society, we've been trying to propose an alternative for drug policy, for drug treatment to Indonesia. But it's very hard for the Indonesian government to listen to this alternative.
2 more minutes. If what were you going to say if you had a chance to speak? You were prevented from speaking by, it seems like, by the UN in conjunction with your government. You were going to speak before the UN and tell them things. What were you going to tell them?
First, death penalty does not deter drug trafficking. It fails. It's a failure, and we need to have a better humane drug policy, which will protect drug users, provide them with access to treatment, and then also to have a strict and effective law enforcement for the drug traffickers.
So you would have said that they should stop killing people.
Yes.
Now, there's some other countries in your region that do it as well.
Yeah.
There's even Malaysia. What are some of the other countries that
Singapore, the three of these like big countries.
They're holding out, and so they're more than other countries that are doing this, more than even in Asia where laws tend to be strictly enforced. Okay, very good. Thank you, Ricky, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
It was a wonderful discussion.
Pleasure.
I learned a lot, and we all learned a lot. Thank you very much for joining us on Let Them Talk, and I hope that you get out there and speak at least at the rally tomorrow at 4 o'clock. There's going to be a rally at the United Nations right across the street on 47th Street, where we'll be hearing from speakers one after another talking about how the war on drugs the international war on drugs should be changed, and should be a change in policy towards a more humane policy. So thank you very much for joining us, and anytime you're welcome on our air. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.